Hello, friends. Welcome to Storycraft. On this channel, you will enjoy world top stories. Let's view the video. The farmer who became a king without anyone noticing. The humble beginnings of a forgotten farmer. A life of hardship and toil. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden rays over an endless stretch of farmland. In a small, forgotten village, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, a man labored beneath its fading glow. His name was Elias, a farmer born into obscurity, his hands calloused from years of tending to the unforgiving soil. Elias had no noble lineage, no wealth, and no claim to power. His family had tilled the land for generations, living humbly on what little the earth provided. The seasons dictated his life, sowing, harvesting, enduring the wrath of nature, and hoping for mercy in return. He was not remarkable by any means, or so it seemed. Despite the hardships, Elias found solace in his work. There was a rhythm to the land, a silent language between man and soil that only those who toiled daily could understand. He knew the scent of rain before it touched the ground, the whispers of the wind foretelling the coming of storms. His connection with nature was deep, almost instinctual, yet no one saw value in it beyond survival. The farmer who dreamed, though. His days were spent knee-deep in soil. Elias's mind often wandered to grander things. At night, he would sit by the dim light of a lantern, poring over old scrolls and parchments salvaged from traveling merchants. Knowledge was his secret passion. While others in the village saw no purpose in education beyond survival, Elias thirsted for understanding of the stars, the lands beyond his village, and the intricacies of human nature. His father would scoff at his curiosity, reminding him that dreams did not fill bellies. "The earth is our master," he would say. "No king, no scholar, no merchant will save you from hunger. Only your own two hands will." And yet Elias could not ignore the nagging thought that he was meant for something greater than a life spent bending over the fields. One evening, after a long day's work, Elias found himself staring at the horizon. He wondered what lay beyond. The distant hills, past the roads that no farmer in his village ever dared to travel. He had heard tales of grand cities, of palaces and scholars, of places where knowledge was as valuable as gold. But for a simple farmer, such dreams were nothing, more than idle fantasies. Still, a fire burned in him, a yearning he could not shake. And so he continued to learn, collecting bits of wisdom from travelers and merchants, storing them away like seeds waiting for the right season to sprout. An unexpected encounter fate, as it often does, weaved its threads in unseen ways. One evening, while returning from the market, Elias came across an old man resting beneath a gnarled oak tree. The man's robes were tattered, his face worn by time, yet his eyes held a sharpness that belied his frail appearance. Elias offered him water, and in return, the old man spoke of distant kingdoms, of rulers both wise and foolish, and of power that did not always reside in gilded halls. "True leadership," he said, "is not always seen, nor does it require a throne." The words lingered in Elias's mind, long after the old man vanished into the night. He did not know it then, but this chance meeting had set a path before him, one that would lead him far beyond the simple life he had always known. The hidden strength of a simple man Elias possessed something rare, the patience of a farmer and the mind of a strategist. Years of tending to crops had taught him to read patterns of weather, of growth, of failure and success. Unknowingly, these very skills would serve him well in the days to come. Unlike the rulers of great kingdoms, Elias did not crave power for its own sake. He had no army, no wealth, no claim to nobility. What he did have was an understanding of people. He knew their struggles because he had lived them. He knew their fears because he had felt them. And most importantly, he knew that change did not always come from the top, but from the roots that ran deep beneath the surface. As the years passed, whispers of Elias's wisdom spread beyond his village. Travelers sought his advice, merchants respected his judgment, and even local leaders began to heed his words. Without realizing it, the farmer was planting the seeds of something far greater than a mere harvest. Lessons from the earth. Farming had taught Elias the importance of patience. A seed did not grow into a tree overnight, nor did a barren field yield crops without effort. He applied this philosophy to life, understanding that true influence was built gradually, like roots spreading beneath the ground, before a mighty oak could rise. When drought struck, Elias adapted, finding new ways to irrigate his fields. When pests ravaged his crops, he studied their patterns, learning how to deter them without the need for costly remedies. His resilience and adaptability became known far beyond his village, drawing the attention of those who ruled the surrounding lands. One day, a nobleman's steward arrived at Elias's farm. The noble had heard of the farmer's wisdom and sought his counsel on an issue that plagued his lands: poor harvests and unrest among the peasants. Elias, though surprised by the request, agreed to visit the noble's estate. What he saw there would change his perspective forever. A glimpse into the world of power. The noble's lands were vast, far greater than Elias had ever imagined. Yet, despite their riches, the fields were poorly managed, and the people suffered. The noble, though well-meaning, lacked understanding of the very land he ruled over. His advisors were men of theory, not practice, and their decisions reflected their ignorance. Elias observed everything: how food was distributed, how workers were treated, how decisions were made, and as he did, he saw the flaws that had led to the noble's troubles. The solutions were simple to him, yet revolutionary to those who had never worked the land themselves. With careful words, Elias shared his insights. He suggested better crop rotation, fairer distribution of grain, and a system where farmers could voice their concerns rather than suffer in silence. The noble, though initially skeptical, saw the wisdom in Elias's advice and implemented his suggestions. Within months, the estate flourished. The harvests improved, the people grew hopeful, and the noble's rule became stronger. And through it all, Elias remained a simple farmer in name, though his influence was growing in ways he had never foreseen. The unseen path to greatness. Elias's journey had only just begun. Though he remained a humble farmer in the eyes of many, those who truly looked saw something different: a leader who did not seek to be followed, a ruler who did not wear a crown, a king who built his kingdom not with swords, but with knowledge and understanding. Little did he know, the world beyond his fields was beginning to take notice. And soon, the farmer who had been forgotten by history would find himself at the heart of something far greater than he had ever imagined. But that is a tale for another chapter. A secret destiny unfolds in the shadows. Whispers of change. As seasons passed, Elias's reputation extended beyond the village, reaching ears that had never before cared for the life of a simple farmer. His wisdom, though spoken in hushed conversations among merchants and peasants, carried weight in places where power resided. Nobles who once dismissed the thoughts of commoners began to take notice. But with recognition came danger, for not all welcomed change. One evening, a messenger clad in worn but sturdy garments arrived at Elias's doorstep. He bore no insignia, no proof of noble service, yet his words were laced with urgency. "You have been summoned," he said. "There are those who seek your counsel, and those who wish you silenced." Elias did not ask who had sent the message. He only nodded, for in his heart he had long known that his journey would not remain within the confines of his fields. A meeting in the dead of night. Under the cover of darkness, Elias followed the messenger through winding paths, past familiar fields that now seemed foreign under the weight of uncertainty. At last they arrived at a secluded grove, where a handful of figures awaited. Among them stood men of influence, discontented nobles, scholars seeking justice, and soldiers weary of a failing kingdom. They spoke of corruption, of a ruler whose neglect had driven the land into despair. Famine spread like fire, and the people suffered while the court feasted. "You see the world differently, Elias," one of them said. "You do not rule, yet you lead. You do not command, yet you are followed. We need a voice that speaks not for power, but for the land and its people." Elias listened, his mind weighing the gravity of their words. He had never sought power. Yet, could he ignore the call of those who suffered? The farmer's dilemma. Returning to his farm, Elias found himself restless. The land he had always known, the simplicity he had embraced, no longer felt like his true home. For the first time, he questioned his purpose. Shadows of power, and the unseen threat. News of Elias's involvement in the secret gathering spread further than expected. Though many saw him as a voice of reason, others viewed him as a growing threat. In the halls of the ruling court, whispers turned to action. A lowly farmer influencing nobles and soldiers was an anomaly that could not be tolerated. In the capital, Lord Gavron, one of the king's closest advisers, watched the situation with growing unease. He had built his power on maintaining control, ensuring that those beneath him remained silent and obedient. Elias was neither, and that made him dangerous. "Silence him," Gavron ordered his spies. "But make it seem like an accident, a lesson to any who think to rise above their station." Unaware of the forces moving against him, Elias prepared for his next steps, oblivious to the eyes watching from the shadows. An unexpected betrayal. The attack came not from soldiers or assassins, but from a place Elias had not foreseen, his own village. Late one night, as he tended to his land, a group of men approached. Not strangers, but familiar faces, fellow farmers, men he had grown up with, men who had once called him friend. But fear is a powerful force, and fear had turned them against him. "You bring danger to us all," one of them said. "The nobles do not tolerate troublemakers." Elias did not fight back as they bound his hands, as they dragged him toward the forest's edge. He knew why they did this. They were not cruel, merely afraid. afraid of the power he had unknowingly wielded, afraid of what it meant for their simple lives. But before they could deliver him to the unknown fate that awaited, the unexpected happened. The escape and the road ahead. A sharp whistle cut through the night. From the darkness, a group of hooded figures emerged. Before Elias's captors could react, they were subdued, their weapons stripped from their hands. The leader of the hooded figures stepped forward, pulling back his hood to reveal a familiar face. It was the messenger who had first summoned Elias to the secret gathering. "You are more important than you know," the man said. "And now, the real game begins." Elias was freed, but his home was no longer safe. The king's men would come looking for him. The nobles who feared him would not stop. If he was to survive, he could not remain in the shadows any longer. With a heavy heart, he turned away from the only home he had ever known, stepping onto a path from which there was no return. The first steps toward an unseen throne. He would walk the path laid before him, not as a king, nor as a rebel, but as something far more dangerous, an idea. One that could not be killed, nor silenced, nor buried beneath the weight of gold and crowns. The world had yet to know it, but the tides of fate had begun to shift, and Elias was at the heart of it all, the rising resistance of the forgotten people, the seeds of rebellion. Far from the golden halls of the kingdom, a storm was brewing, not of nature, but of hearts and minds. Across distant towns and crumbling villages, people whispered the same name, Elias, the farmer who spoke truth to power, the man who had challenged the silence. Those whispers were no longer just idle gossip. They were growing into something more, into questions, into meetings behind closed doors, into quiet defiance. Merchants began to share messages hidden in sacks of grain. Blacksmiths forged tools that could double as weapons. Scholars penned letters filled with revolutionary ideas. Elias, though still in hiding, had become a symbol, not of war, but of awakening. A symbol that the forgotten had a voice, and that voice was becoming louder. But symbols alone do not change kingdoms. They needed plans. They needed action. They needed to become more than scattered murmurs. They needed to become a force. The gathering at Hollow Ridge. It was at Hollow Ridge, a place where cliffs overlooked a silent valley, that the resistance gathered. Not an army, at least not yet, but a coalition. Former soldiers who had grown disillusioned with the crown, teachers who had been silenced, midwives who had seen too many children die from neglect. And there, standing among them, was Elias. He had no armor, no title, no banner, but his presence held more weight than 1,000 spears. "I am no king," Elias told them, "but I know this land. I know its pain, and I will not watch it be torn apart while those with the power to change it feast in ignorance." The crowd did not erupt into cheers. They simply nodded, for these were not people seeking glory. They were seeking purpose. Hollow Ridge became their quiet beginning, their sacred ground. They built tents from salvaged cloth, kept fires small, and moved under the cover of fog. Scouts mapped out secret trails and hidden passages through the forests. Artisans crafted codes and signals to be used across great distances. And from that mountain ridge, the resistance began to spread like roots through the soil. The Council of Shadows. To lead a resistance was not to simply inspire, it required strategy. Elias, with the help of a few loyal minds, formed what became known as the Council of Shadows. They were not chosen by blood, but by insight, loyalty, and lived pain. Among them, Mira, a healer whose village was raised by tax collectors. Thorn, a former royal guard who had refused an order to execute innocent peasants. Elric, a scholar banished for teaching forbidden truths. Each brought a piece of the kingdom's suffering with them. Together they mapped routes, intercepted royal supply chains, and slowly bled the kingdom's hold without shedding more blood than necessary. They disagreed often about tactics, about philosophy, about sacrifice. But one thing united them: the belief that Elias was the spark that could reignite the soul of a broken nation. Spies in the market, hope in the streets. Even in the capital, where the king's banners waved high and soldiers patrolled every corner, the resistance had eyes and ears. Street performers disguised as jesters passed messages through songs. Tavern owners listened more than they poured. Bakers stamped crumbs into codes. And in the shadows of alleyways, children ran with secrets no adult dared speak aloud. Letters disguised as poetry traveled in books. Paintings on walls carried hidden meanings. A symbol, a broken crown inside. A circle began to appear, scratched into wood, carved into stone, sewn into clothes. For every whisper of cruelty from the court, a whisper of Elias followed it. He became myth and man, ghost and guardian. The king, locked in his tower, grew paranoid, demanding loyalty oaths and punishment for any who dared speak the farmer's name. The more he cracked down, the more the people resisted. A fire on the horizon. It was inevitable. The silence broke. In the mining village of Branneth, soldiers attempted to seize all food stores, blaming the resistance for dwindling supplies. But the villagers, starving, weary, and pushed too far, fought back. With pickaxes and fists, they drove the soldiers out. The incident sparked outrage across the land. The crown declared Branneth an enemy stronghold. Troops were dispatched. But by the time they arrived, the village was gone, evacuated, guided by the resistance through secret forest trails. The fire that had been lit in Branneth now burned in the hearts of thousands. This was no longer just survival. It was a revolution. Word of Branneth reached Hollow Ridge within days. The Council of Shadows met in urgency. Some feared it was too soon, that open rebellion would doom them. Others, like Thorn, argued that retreat would embolden the crown. Elias listened in silence. Then he stood. "We do not choose the hour history calls upon us," he said, "but we must answer it with courage." A kingdom fractured. The king's court reeled. Lord Gavron, his spymaster, reported growing discontent in every region. Supply lines had been disrupted. Local magistrates were turning sympathetic. And most troubling, some of the king's own guards had begun to vanish without a trace. Panic bred desperation. Taxes were raised again. Towns that failed to meet quotas were burned. Public executions increased. But none of it worked. Because the people no longer feared punishment. They feared silence. They feared the world Elias warned of, where apathy reigned and justice was bought with gold. Even nobles began to whisper in private. What if the farmer was right? The burden of becoming more. Elias watched it all unfold with a heavy heart. He had never wanted war. He wanted to change the world with reason, with patience. But the world was not patient, and now blood had touched the soil. He did not claim leadership, but the people gave it to him anyway. Because when they looked to the horizon and saw fear, they also saw Elias standing against it. That vision kept them moving forward. Behind closed doors, he wept for the lives already lost. But he knew he could not stop now, not when so many had pinned their hopes to his name. He carried their hope like armor, not for glory, but because turning back was no longer an option. He remembered the quiet fields he once tilled, the earth that welcomed seed and sun alike. That earth was changing now. It was becoming the foundation of something new, something not yet seen but deeply needed. The warrior's path and the trials of leadership. The weight of a leader. Elias had never sought to be a leader, yet the burden of an entire movement now rested upon his shoulders. Every decision he made could cost lives. Every delay could mean suffering. He was no longer just a farmer. He was the architect of a rebellion that had outgrown even his own expectations. Nights were sleepless, filled with whispered strategy sessions and maps spread across candle-lit tables. Supplies had to be secured, allies reassured, and enemies anticipated. The once silent resistance was now an undeniable force, but with its rise came new threats. And Elias knew that power did not yield without a fight. Forging an army from shadows. They could not match the king's forces in numbers, nor could they afford open war. The resistance had to be smarter, faster, and more adaptable. At Hollow Ridge, former soldiers trained farmers to wield bows and daggers. Hunters taught city dwellers how to move unseen through forests. Merchants learned to decipher coded messages. Every person, no matter how unskilled, was given a role. Weapons were scarce, but the people had something stronger than steel. They had purpose. And in Elias, they saw not just a leader, but proof that one man's will could shake an empire. Betrayal. In the ranks, victory does not come without cost. It was only a matter of time before the king sought to strike from within. One evening, a rider arrived at Hollow Ridge with urgent news. A scouting party had been ambushed. Survivors whispered of betrayal. Someone within the resistance had revealed their movements. Panic spread like wildfire. Elias gathered his council, his voice calm but firm. Fear is our enemy's weapon. If we turn against each other, we are already defeated. But trust, once fractured, is not easily mended. As suspicion grew, Elias made a choice that would define his leadership. He would not rule through fear, nor through unchecked loyalty. Instead, he would uncover the traitor through truth. The trial of truth. In the dead of night, a plan was set into motion. False information was spread, rumors of a secret supply route, a vulnerable convoy. Those who remained loyal stayed their course, but the traitor took the bait. When the enemy moved on the false lead, Elias and his most trusted allies lay in wait. The trap was sprung, and the betrayer was revealed. It was a man Elias had once called friend. Silence filled the air. As the traitor was brought before the council, There was no need for trial. His guilt was evident. The question was not whether he was guilty, but how Elias would handle justice. The council called for execution. Some demanded exile. Others feared that mercy would only invite further treachery. Elias stood before the condemned man. He did not see a villain. He saw a man who had been broken by fear. But in war, even the kindest hearts must make hard choices. He did not grant execution, nor did he grant freedom. Instead, the man was cast into exile, forever marked as a betrayer. It was not cruelty that guided Elias's choice. It was understanding. He had seen what fear could do, and he knew that the hardest battles were not fought with swords, but with the weight of leadership itself. The first true victory. Days after the betrayal, word reached the resistance. A royal caravan, carrying supplies meant for the king's forces, was traveling unguarded through the western pass. It was a rare opportunity. Elias knew that a strike now would send a message, one that could turn whispers of rebellion into a roar. Under cover of darkness, they moved. Archers hid in the cliffs. Warriors lay in wait among the trees. When the caravan entered the pass, the resistance struck with precision. Not a single soldier escaped. The supplies were seized, the message clear. The resistance was no longer a shadow in the dark. It was an undeniable force. And for the first time, the people believed, not just in Elias, but in the hope of victory. The hidden throne and the crown unseen, whispers in the capital. Even as the countryside roared with rebellion, the capital remained a gilded cage. Tall spires reached into the sky like skeletal fingers, and the streets below teemed with fear dressed as order. But beneath the surface, cracks began to show. Servants muttered in corners. Noble lords exchanged glances that lasted too long. The name Elias, once taboo, now floated like ash on the wind. Some dared believe that the kingdom's era of absolute rule was nearing its end. Others, still tethered to privilege, plotted how to use the unrest for their own gain. But the most dangerous whispers came not from commoners or traitorous lords. They came from the king's own advisors. The king's deterioration. Once a ruler of iron resolve, King Alderic had grown paranoid, erratic. He ordered executions for imagined slights. He dismissed loyal counselors and replaced them with sycophants. Food went untouched. Doors were locked from within. Mirrors were shattered in fits of rage. He feared Elias, not as a man, but as an idea. One he could not crush with a sword. One he could not bribe or shame. His obsession drove him into isolation, and with each passing week, the throne room grew colder. The masked messenger, one evening, under the flickering torchlight of a northern outpost, Elias was approached by a lone rider. Cloaked in midnight cloth and bearing the emblem of the crown, the figure dismounted and bowed low. "I come not with sword, but with a message," the figure said, "from within the heart of the beast." It was a woman named Lysandra, once a scribe in the king's court. Her brother had vanished for daring to speak against the crown. Now she risked her life to bring Elias a map, one that revealed secret tunnels beneath the palace, relics from a time before Alderic's rule. "There are those within the walls who remember the kingdom before the rot," she whispered, "and they want it back." Elias took the map without a word, but his eyes, bright with fire, spoke volumes. The decision to enter the lion's den. Elias called the Council of Shadows. Around him sat his most trusted advisors. Thorn, Mira, Elric, all bore the fatigue of a long war, but none questioned their purpose. "We have lit the fires in every valley," Elias said, "but the heart of the kingdom still beats. If we are to end this, it must be from within." It was a dangerous gamble. Storming the capital was suicide. But infiltration, that was possible. The council debated through the night. Strategies were laid bare. Risks were acknowledged. In the end, it was agreed. Elias would go, disguised, protected, but exposed nonetheless. Because sometimes, to change the world, you must walk willingly into the lion's den. A city in shadow under. The cover of Festival Week, when the capital opened its gates to distant provinces, Elias entered the city, dressed as a trader. With him were Mira and Thorn posing as servants. They moved carefully, watched constantly, and trusted no one. What they found was a city suffocating in silence. The people wore masks of contentment, but behind closed doors, anger brewed. Elias met with underground sympathizers, blacksmiths, innkeepers, even a librarian who guarded a hidden vault of banned books. Each whispered the same thing. The time had come. The hidden throne room. Lysandra's map proved true. Beneath the oldest temple in the capital, a hidden door led to the ancient catacombs. By torchlight, Elias and his companions navigated twisting tunnels that hadn't seen footsteps in a generation. At the end stood a stone archway sealed with iron. Carved above it were the words, "Truth is the crown of the just." Beyond the door lay a forgotten throne room, built by the first kings, untouched by Alderic's rule. There, hidden in darkness, Elias saw what the kingdom had once been, a place of wisdom, not fear. Mira touched the crumbling stone walls. "This is where it must begin again," she said. Elias nodded. He felt it too. The final message. They could not yet take the palace, but they could deliver a message. That night, from the highest tower of the city, a banner unfurled, one stitched by dozens of hands in secrecy. Upon it was a simple symbol, the broken crown in a circle. All across the city, people looked up. The message was clear. The resistance was within the walls. And the king, in his chamber, screamed. His guards found him trembling, muttering Elias's name again and again. A throne, without a king. What came next was not a battle, but a collapse. Alderic, shattered by fear and betrayal, ordered his own guards arrested. He claimed his food was poisoned, his walls alive. He screamed that Elias walked the halls. Within days, his council seized control. The nobility declared him unfit to rule. And though they attempted to grasp the reins, they found the people already turning to another, to the farmer, to the man who had risen without armies, who had walked beside them, not above them, to Elias, the crown unseen. When Elias returned to Hollow Ridge, it was not with a crown or parade. He wore no jewels, gave no speeches. But everywhere he walked, people bowed, not in fear, but in respect. He did not declare himself king. He did not sit upon the throne. But in every village, in every town, his decisions were followed. His words were law. His presence was peace. He had become the ruler no one had crowned, the king no one had noticed until it was done. Thanks for watching. Subscribe our channel Storycraft for more interesting videos.